But I am absolutely delighted to convene this evening, to preside this evening a peace husting for the Scottish elections on the 6th of May. Peace husting as far as it is arranged by my wonderful colleagues from the Campaign Against the Arms Trade, from the Campaign for Nuclear Disarmament, by Pax Christi and other peace groups. This is going to be recorded, so if you are saying anything, your voice will be recorded. If you turn on your camera, your face will be recorded. Please be aware of that. In any case, we are now delighted to have already 4 of our 5 different participants from different political parties who are going to be standing for the elections in May, and are going to be answering our questions on a variety of issues that I will put to them. Before we launch into that, I'd just like them very, very briefly to introduce themselves, and in order of how they made their appearance here this evening. I will start with David McKenzie from the Liberal Democrats. Would you just like to briefly introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Thanks, thank you everybody for taking the time to attend this evening and obviously participate in the democratic process. And it's so wonderful to see so many people attending this evening. My name is David McKenzie. I am the Scottish Liberal Democrat candidate for Glasgow Kelvin, and I'm also standing on the Glasgow constituency list, regional list, I should say, sorry, for the Scottish Liberal Democrats. This has been a subject that has always been close to my heart, especially peace and making sure we live in a peaceful society and we make sure that countries around the world come together and we all pull together in terms of international coordination and how we keep a peaceful, united world. So I'm delighted to be a part of this evening and look forward to the debate.
Thank you very much, David. Alex, you came second today. Say something.
Thank you, Beatrice. My name's Rowley. I'm currently an MSP for Mid-Scotland and Fife on the regional list, and I'm standing in this election as a list candidate in Mid-Scotland and Fife and the Cowdenbeath constituency. Thank you for the invite and to everyone that's taken part tonight. Thanks.
Great. Thank you very much. I think Bill Kidd came next. Would you like to say something about yourself?
Yes, thank you very much. I'm Bill Kidd. Glasgow Anniesland is my constituency that I'm standing in, and I've been an MSP previously for 14 years, 10 of those for Glasgow Anniesland, and I am very much involved in the nuclear disarmament field. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Ross, at least with you, we know which party you represent.
Thanks, Beatrice. Yes, for the last 5 years, I've been Green MSP for the West of Scotland, which includes the Faslane base, of course. I'm the Scottish Green spokesperson on issues of defence and external affairs. And I've also been the vice convener of the Scottish Parliament's cross-party group on nuclear disarmament, which has been very ably convened by Bill.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And thank you for having kept this brief. Well, how we're going to proceed is that I'm going to put to you questions which are amalgams of a very large number of questions that have been put to us and that I'm trying to bundle into 4 or 5 different questions for you. Each time I'd like you to go around and each time answer briefly and succinctly where your position on those particular questions are. This is sort of a bit like Radio 4 news quiz or something like that, but let's keep it very serious because this is a serious topic. Okay, so to start with, we are apparently on the anniversary, of the Chernobyl nuclear catastrophe. And in that context, we're also very close to another very important date, which is that on the 22nd of January, the Treaty for the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons has come into force with 86 signatories and 54 ratifications so far. You are, I'm sure, all aware of the fact that it will become customary international law unless the United Kingdom and some other countries very frequently reiterate their own dissent from this. So where do you stand on this? And before we actually, I think that we have just had Maurice Corry join us. So welcome, Maurice. I'm sorry we have started slightly before you. Can you just very briefly say where you're standing, which constituency you are, where you're standing for election, because we had that round with the others?
Yes, I'm standing in the Dumbarton constituency.
And Barton.
Yeah, West Scotland. I'm sorry, I was on another call at the same time as the newspapers, so I do apologise for being slightly late coming on board.
I'm sure we'll still give you the fair chance to answer this question. To repeat, this is about, we're at the coming now into the subject after the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons has come into force. Where do you stand on the fact that this is going to become customary international law unless the United Kingdom keeps protesting about it? Do you think that the United Kingdom, or indeed an independent Scotland, should ultimately one day join this treaty? Under which conditions? This is a difficult one to answer very briefly, but I'd like to give you the opportunity to do so. And as Ross has been spending time on this particular subject in his own life, would you like to start us off?
Yes, thank you. So very briefly, all Green MSPs in the last session of Parliament proudly signed up to the treaty. We believe that it is one of the very first acts that an independent Scotland should partake is to sign up. We would go further though. I mean, for example, what we really want to see is, we can do this now, we don't need to wait for independence. We want Scotland under current devolved arrangements to seek observer status in a couple of UN offices, in the Office of Disarmament Affairs and the Non-Proliferation and Disarmament Initiative. So independence for Scotland is absolutely the way to get us signed up to the treaty and actually to the removal of Trident from our territory. I'm not remotely optimistic about the UK taking that step, but short of achieving our independence, there are steps that we can take now under the current devolved arrangements to help push forward the global disarmament agenda.
Thank you very much. Could I turn to Bill Kidd, and could I ask you where you stand on this particular issue?
Thank you very much, Beatrice. I was in the United Nations in 2017 when the TPNW was adopted, and I presented the chair of the conference with a letter of support for the passing of the treaty from our First Minister. It's in the DNA, if we can put it that way, of the SNP to be nuclear disarming. And we want to see Scotland as a nuclear disarmed country as a first step towards a nuclear disarmed world.
Thank you very much. Alex Rowley, can I ask you?
Yeah, I mean, I should stress that I talk for the Scottish Labour Party, not the UK Labour Party. But in terms of the Scottish Party, then, yeah, we should sign up to the treaty. The Scottish Labour Party has, through its policy, through its conference, opposed previously the renewal of Trident. We do believe in multilateral disarmament, and we believe that Scotland needs to work with the rest of the UK. We have to convince people of that case and build a case for peace around the world. You won't achieve peace by simply taking the nukes off the Clyde and putting them down the road a bit. So if we want peace in the world, then Scotland has a major role to play, but we need to convince people across the United Kingdom and work for peace across the world. That would be my position. Thanks.
Thank you very much. David McKenzie, where is your party? Where do you stand on this?
Yes, thanks, Beatrice. So absolutely, we should sign up to the treaty, but I think where probably I differ from maybe Ross and Bill is that I believe first and foremost that it's of the United Kingdom that will be best placed to get rid of nuclear weapons across the world. I'm a multilateralist, I'm not a unilateralist, and in fact I think just moving them a few hundred miles from the Clyde down to Portsmouth actually negates any moral obligation that we have to do what we can to get nuclear weapons out of the world. So I believe, yes, we should play our part, sign up, but we should take a step which the Lib Dems have always been fundamental in, that we should take it down to a minimum level and we should negotiate away these weapons.
Thank you very much. And last not least, Maurice Corry, could you give your position on this? I hope you've warmed up by now. Unmute yourself, please.
Yeah, no, thank you very much indeed, Beatrice. Yes, I mean, being a military man myself, I have very clear views on this. I mean, our party's stance is very clear. This is a United Kingdom issue. Defence is reserved for Westminster, and that is the way it is. We are a party, we want peace in the world, we want multilateral peace across the world, and there is absolutely no way are we going to be unilateral on this. We'll have to be multilateral, as indeed the other main party, the Labour Party, are. And it absolutely sounds sense. I mean, you know, I've worked with many of the Eastern Bloc countries. I understand their philosophies. I understand their questions about dominance and the question of strategic defence. And strategic defence is a vitally important situation into our security, and our continuous at sea deterrent is a very important question. And when we see what's going on in the world today, and I get that directly from Russians, I get that directly from people who've been in the Warsaw Pact countries, and it is a question of being strong. And we as the United Kingdom must remain strong. And part of our strategic defence is the Trident submarine programme or other issues. You know, people respect that. And, you know, when you get told by a Russian colonel to your face is keep it strong, keep up strong leadership, make sure you never know what hoodlums are going to be in charge here in Russia or indeed in other parts of the world. And therefore, if any peace is going to be negotiated, it have to be at the multilateral disarmament, it'll have to be at a multilateral level. And that's the only way we would consider it at any way. But of course, we want peace in the world. We don't want any weapons to be used in that way, in an offensive way, as far as nuclear weapons are concerned. And we wish that to be the case.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much, gentlemen, for having kept it short and snappy, because that's this way we can fit in more questions. Can I start with one track and then track back and then go in a slightly different direction? First of all, start with the idea of nuclear retention, and still multilaterally everybody has divested themselves of their nuclear weapons. So could I ask how you feel about the idea of the United Kingdom having nuclear weapons, but then denying it to other countries? Now, in the past, for many decades, there has been a position that the United Kingdom has taken up, unlike France, incidentally, by saying that it has a commitment to defend in extremis its allies, now explicitly formulated in the integrated review, its allies in NATO with nuclear weapons if it became necessary. But this is interestingly now its allies in NATO having withdrawn from the European Union, it will no longer be its allies in the European Union, even though there was a particularly strong commitment in the European Union Treaty that derived from the Western Union. So how do you feel about that particular situation where the Baltic states have to be defended, or Britain has committed itself to defend its Baltic states allies because they're in NATO, but not necessarily Finland and Sweden, just as a little teaser. Maurice, would you like to start with that one?
Yes, I mean, when you're a member of NATO, you attack on one country, one member of NATO is an attack on all of them. And I've been involved in it. I've served in the Balkans and I've served in support out in Afghanistan. And I know the full effort of NATO to protect nations. And I mean, if we didn't have NATO going into the Balkans, I don't know where we would be now. And that's obviously in the eastern part of the European area. And equally, we've helped to stabilize things as far as possible in Afghanistan. So there's a lot of merit in NATO, and it obviously is incumbent on each member to help each other. And that's the fantastic strength of it. I mean, I've experienced it for many years. And I know the reaction of local people in these countries who are ever so grateful for the fact that we're able to do that. And they have that safety and that security that they know will help them come to their help wherever possible. And even in the Balkans, we had the thing called Partnership for Peace, which was non-NATO countries, but working with us. And I had a lot to do with that because most of those are Eastern European countries and Warsaw Pact countries. And I had extremely good relationships with those countries in working together in evolving peace and getting that country, those areas, whether it be Bosnia, Croatia, etc., Serbia, Montenegro, Kosovo, back to normal. And it was absolutely first class. So I've absolutely no question about the fact that an attack on one is an attack on all, and that's the way it should be.
All, but only if they're in NATO, not our EU former allies there. I'll just leave it at that. But could I turn?
Well, no. Now, what I'm saying is that is the credibility of NATO as a member of NATO. Now, I've just given you an example, if you heard me correctly, in the fact that we involved Partners for Peace, and those were non-NATO countries, but were in the European sector.
Yeah, but
no, we do. We are able to take that into consideration. So, in other words, it's showing that we would come to the help of them and not leave them on their own, Beatrice.
Yeah, but it's nothing to do with a nuclear guarantee. Can I ask Dave McKenzie how you would have the take on this one? The question of why some countries and why not others if you are guaranteeing them?
Yeah, look, I think it's an interesting question. Look, obviously the Lib Dems, the Scottish Liberal Democrats, are obviously committed to remaining a member of the NATO, and also we want to eventually get back to being part of the EU as well. But obviously, we believe totally in the face that it's up to international law, and you have to make sure that there's international agreement before you go into any conflict, and it's a legal obligation. I absolutely believe, I've done some work in the past with people like Romeo Dallaire, who obviously was involved in the genocide in Rwanda and the Will to Intervene project. But all of these things have to be in coordination with the UN. They have to be legal, and they have to go through a parliamentary vote before they happen. So I think my personal belief is that you have to take it and you have to look at this. I don't think you should do case by case basis.
Thank you very much. For the other three candidates, I'll have to tweak my question because of what you said about your own attitudes to nuclear weapons in the first place. How would you go about defending allies if you don't have that nuclear element in your arsenal? Can I start with Alex Rowley again, please?
Well, I'm not convinced that on a strategic basis. I get that people will be on this tonight who come at this from a moral point of view. But I actually think from a strategic defence point of view, having Trident doesn't add up. It doesn't make actually any sense in defence grounds. And if you were going to work to support other countries around the world, you would certainly need a stronger navy than we have at present. Our navy is being run down and run down and run down, so we'll end up with a few of these nukes running around, a couple of aircraft carriers and a couple of frigates that can support them, and that'll be it. So you're seeing in Britain, I mean, that if we keep going like this, where our military capabilities are being eroded continually, we wouldn't be really up for being able to support very many countries. That's the truth of the matter. So I'm not sure that having Trident, having a nuclear weapon, is the way to come together with others to defend them if they were in such a position. I don't believe that we should look or walk by on the other side when any country is in difficulty. But we're doing that right now in countries around the world where we see people dying of starvation due to wars that are being waged in their countries. We're turning a blind eye to that. So there needs to be a wider discussion, I think, about moving forward as a country. How do we, evidence-based, how best do we defend ourselves and be allies to others to defend each other where that may be necessary? And I think nuclear weapons would not come into that. Thanks.
Thank you very much. So you're fairly happy with the increased naval spending in the integrated review. Bill Kidd, could I ask you how you would defend the United Kingdom if the nuclear element isn't there to do so?
Well, as has been mentioned earlier by Ross, actually, I don't think that the United Kingdom is the route to go forward with, and I'm looking for an independent Scotland's proposals. However, as we stand at the moment, there are no conventional surface ships, naval vessels based in Scotland. What we've got is nuclear powered and nuclear armed submarines. Now, Scotland has a very large coastline and a large amount of area of the sea where we still have oil and gas, and we still have our energy supplies for renewables to be protected as well in the normal manner, and we've got our fisheries. And to not have surface naval vessels based in Scotland seems preposterous. However, we do have all of the UK's nuclear weapons based here, as far as away from Westminster as is possible to put them. Now, as far as I'm concerned, it's extraordinarily important that we don't put all our eggs in one mass murderous basket. It's very, very, very dangerous, even if only under circumstances of a mistake or an accident, as to what can actually happen with those nuclear weapons. And you're not protecting anybody anywhere else in the world by having nuclear weapons. In fact, As has been mentioned in the chat box, 130 countries around the world have agreed that they don't want nuclear weapons to exist anymore. Unfortunately, the UK is not one of those, and the UK government has just actually been talking about substantially upgrading by 40% the number of nuclear weapons that we have based or at least owned by the UK. As far as I'm concerned, nuclear weapons are a danger to the planet. They don't make anyone any safer. And if we do want to be a good neighbour and support other members of the international community around the world, nuclear weapons doesn't help you to do it. If you've got a properly set up conventional armed forces that you can then use to help other countries that might be under threat.
So a shift towards conventional armed forces, and you mentioned naval vessels for the coast defence. We'll come back to the question of Scottish independence and the effects of that. Could I turn to Ross Greer, please?
Thanks. To get right back to the heart of the question, I mean, NATO isn't just a defensive alliance, it's a first strike alliance. And that's not only immoral, thoroughly, utterly immoral, the idea you can reserve the right to launch the first strike in a nuclear war, but it's also strategically antagonistic. Like, that's not advancing the cause of peace, that's deliberately antagonistic. NATO draws the strongest justification for its existence is in physical force defense of the Baltic states. And defense from who? From Russia. If we were remotely serious about tackling the terrible regime in the Kremlin, we would clean up money laundering in the City of London. If you want to really put the squeeze on the autocrat in the Kremlin, if you really want to put the squeeze on Putin, you clean up the City of London. But of course, it wouldn't just be people around Vladimir Putin who would suffer as a result of that. It would be people around the current occupant of 10 Downing Street as well. If NATO wants to justify itself by what it does in the Baltic states, well, also needs to take responsibility for what it does elsewhere. And of course, Turkey is a member of NATO. So every war crime committed by every Turkish soldier, either against their own citizens, Kurds in Turkey, or increasingly now in Syria, those are the responsibility of all NATO nations. NATO doesn't foster peace. You only need to look at the damage, the ethnic cleansing that NATO is responsible for in Syria to see that this is not a defensive alliance. This is cover. Turkey draws from NATO the ability to take these actions without serious consequence. So no, it's not a strategic defensive alliance. It's antagonistic. It gives nations like Turkey carte blanche to commit terrible, violent war crimes against their own citizens as well as neighbouring nations. And if we were actually serious about defence in any meaningful way, we would look at where the actual threat is and how we can completely recalibrate our geopolitics. But of course, as I said, if you want to really tackle money laundering in the City of London, where the people around Putin draw a lot of their power and a lot of their money from, you will upset some very rich and powerful people in this country as well, which is why this just comes back to the question of imperialism. You asked at the start, why does NATO defend some countries but not others? Imperialism.
No, that wrong. No, I didn't. I said NATO and not EU members. Thank you very much. But I'll just on the question, that means that you would want to get out of NATO. You would want Scotland to withdraw, or the United Kingdom as a whole to withdraw from NATO, whereas the other four candidates would want to rejoin NATO if Scotland became independent. Is that correct? Have I interpret all of you in the right in that way? Bill and Alex,
Scotland should be an independent country, so that would be member state of the United Kingdom of NATO.
No, I know about David, but I'm just asking about Alex and Bill. Did I rightly, correctly interpret what you said as saying that if Scotland became independent, you would be in favour of Scotland applying for NATO membership?
Well, I don't think Scotland will become independent, but I believe that the UK should remain part of NATO. Absolutely.
Okay. No, I must take. Sorry, Bill. Can I just pin you down on that particular point?
Yeah. As far as NATO is concerned, we are not at all happy about the nuclear aspects that are part of NATO's setup. We do want to be able to cooperate with other countries, and it would actually be part of a negotiation in terms of an independent Scotland's establishing itself internationally in terms of the issues to do with NATO. NATO is based very greatly, as it stands at the moment, around a nuclear capacity, which we are completely against.
Okay, thank you very much. I need to ask.
Am I allowed to correct something?
Go ahead.
Bill Kidd is actually wrong about vessels and aircraft based in Scotland. I'll just run through them. the aircraft carrier strike force, which was actually initiated by the Labour government, the UK Labour government, was a very good move, very smart move, and I must congratulate Alex's party on that one. And it's now paying dividends as we gather 2 strike forces to basically be worldwide to help other nations apart from ourselves. But also the Minesweeper Squadron surface vessels are based at Faslane, and they cover the world from here. The Astute-class submarines are non-Trident submarines are based at Faslane. The P-8 air surveillance aircraft, newly formed squadrons, are based at Lossiemouth. So there is a considerable amount based on other forces, both air and sea. So just wanted to correct that on that point of view. And also the other point is that the UK government today has brought in restrictions on several Russian citizens and direct relationship to money laundering and illegal dealings. So that is already happening as of today, if you heard the news tonight.
Thank you for both corrections. That's very helpful. I now have a question which I cannot fairly ask all of you, because I know that some of you are very much against Scottish independence. So I just have to ask the 2 who are in favour of it, if you bear with me. And that is the question of how, in the case of Scottish independence, would this affect your particular position on what should happen to the forces in Faslane? You've already said that you want to get rid of them, but how? How would you want to do that? And in what way would you like to do that?
Do you want me to go?
Bill, yes.
Okay, right, thank you. When you say get rid of them, it sounds a wee bit drastic. What we're actually
yes,
that's okay. What we're looking to do is to get rid of the nuclear weapons element of what is based at Faslane. As far as the Scottish National Party is concerned, we want to have a conventional naval base at Faslane Coolport. That's what we're looking for, is a conventional naval base. Now, the number of people who are employed at Faslane is 524 who are specifically on Trident. The rest of them are on naval engineering and other types of duties. These types of job can be absorbed into a conventional naval base, but we are also talking about the fact that Scotland, in terms of, has 1/4 of Europe's renewable energy potential, which is shamefully underdeveloped by the UK government. And people who are working in that base at the moment could actually be working on developing our renewable energy capacity and making Scotland a world leader in that. That's what we're looking to do. We're not throwing people out. We're not getting rid of them. What we're doing is we're changing direction for what their employability is there for.
You've already answered the question, the follow-up question that I was going to put to you. Thank you very much. But could I ask Ross what he would do about people who would lose their employment in that area if Faslane was going to go altogether or was not replaced by something naval related?
Yeah, it's a very similar answer to Bill. I mean, these are my constituents. I represent this area right now. So Maurice and I are both West of Scotland MSPs, and I have no desire to create unemployment. And as Bill said, the employment opportunities there are vast. So the Greens also accept that we need conventional naval forces once we're independent. I think our idea of the size, the scale and the capabilities of those forces would be a bit different to other parties. We'd be much more focused on international peacekeeping missions, the increasing demand and need to respond to the climate emergency and increased natural disasters, etc. But there would be a need for conventional naval forces, and Faslane makes sense as a deep water West Coast based for that. But as Bill said, you know, our untapped renewable, particularly offshore wind off the west of Scotland resources, those resources are vast. And one of the things that restricts us from really harnessing that off the west coast are the restrictions imposed by the UK government so that those submarines can travel unimpeded into and out of the base. Once we've got rid of that, we can do far more to really launch the offshore wind industry off the west coast. And there are so many transferable skills for the folk who already work in and around the base that could be used in those kind of industries as well. So some of the jobs would stay as conventional naval jobs on that base in independent Scotland, a different kind of navy, but they would stay. And in other areas, we can actually create far, far more jobs. We can create thousands of jobs by taking full advantage of the fact that we will have full control over our territorial waters, and we can really begin to exploit the vast natural renewable resources that we have there.
Thank you very much. I was wondering, however, whether everybody, all five of you, sorry, might have an opinion on the idea, the proposal that has been floated to put forward a Scottish Defence Diversification Agency. Which particular party has been responsible for this proposal? Can somebody help me there? Does anybody know who came up with that? But in any case, does your party have something on it?
Can I just mention that Scottish CND and the Scottish Trade Union Congress have worked very extensively together in putting forward proposals for a denuclearised approach to increasing job opportunities and developing defence diversification. So Scottish CND deserves a very great deal of support for that.
Anybody else want to? Alex, would you like to say something?
Yeah, I grew up in Fife, and when I was a schoolboy in Fife, we had the Rosyth Naval Base, where we had the subs, the Polaris, and we were then expecting Trident to come in there, but the government of the day, the Tory government of the day, took a decision to store them down south. And in Fife, we campaigned for the naval base to remain, because the key issue there was jobs, and I think that's what it comes down to. So defence diversification, a great friend of mine, Alec Faulkner, who was involved in this whole movement most of his life, was a shop steward before he became an MEP, and he was a shop steward in the Rosyth Dockyard, and back then we were talking about defence diversification. Today, the same language is used around a just transition, where people say we need to get rid of fossil fuels, which we do, but then the trade unions come back and talk about the jobs. And so that's where we need to really focus on, is if we're whether you're calling it defence diversification or a just transition, where are the jobs going to come from? And that means state intervention. Here in Fife, we have a massive offshore wind farm, I think 90 turbines, 100 turbines, and they basically, the jackets for those turbines are being built in Indonesia and being shipped halfway across the world, whilst there is yards in Fife and Arnish lying empty that weren't able to get that work. So the trade unions, when I talk to them, rightly say to me, you're talking about our members' jobs here. And if you're talking about our members' jobs, then you need more than just simply nice words to say where the jobs of the future are going to come from. And a key part of that, I believe, in this election, because remember, we don't have responsibility for defence, but in this election, it is about committing to much greater state intervention. That wind farm I'm talking about is owned by a French state company. So the French government owns that company. We have foreign governments from around the world setting up companies and coming to Scotland, and we're getting none of the work. So we need to address those issues if we're serious about defence diversification or a just transition from fossil fuels and dirty factories. Thanks.
I will come to the question of arms manufacturers and visiting places of education in a moment. But before that, could I just ask a question about a very traditional Scottish occupation? And perhaps Maurice can help me on this one. I believe there's been a recent decrease of military recruitment, not only in Scotland, but also in the north of England, relatively to the rest of the country, a slight down. Having said that, on the whole, there used to be disproportionately many Scots in the British Armed Forces. Correct me if I've misperceived that. I'm not very strong on defence sociology, but I think that's the case. My question is to what extent would people want to join purely Scottish armed forces in the case of independence? And to what extent would that make the armed forces a very unattractive career to pursue for anybody who wants to have adventures, travel abroad and all this sort of thing? And I was wondering whether Maurice had an opinion on this.
Well, I mean, basically, proportionally, Scotland has, shot well above the UK average of people joining the armed forces. We recruit well from Scotland as a percentage of population. So, and that's traditionally been the case for many years. Secondly, is that like everything else, I mean, I remember the Gordon Highlanders, the demise, sadly, of the Gordon Highlanders in the Aberdeenshire area was because of the rise of the oil industry. And basically, there were obviously excellent jobs in the oil industry, and people were not being able to be recruited. There was a complete lack of people there to go into the armed forces. But equally, the armed forces offer a career. And from that point of view, those career skills come out when people come out of the forces. I have a lot to do with that with veterans. They offer some superb skills to civilian communities and civilian jobs. And I mean, one of the things I've been working on the past Parliament was this question of swords into ploughshares, and looking at Lossiemouth, Faslane, and Alex referred to Rosyth as one area I looked at with Keith Brown, who was then the Veterans Minister in the Scottish Government, and also in Edinburgh, to see if we can set up science parks to capture those skills when people come out of the forces. So we're trying to always get more parity between Civvy Street, shall we say, and indeed the armed forces, to make sure that people have a skills that's transferable from that point of view. So, of course, in recruitment, you're going to have up and down. You're going to have shortages here, shortages there, depending what the forces require. You find that in the Navy, there's a lot of technical skills required for obvious reasons. An aeronautical side and the air side, the same. And in the Army, there's a lot of it happening now, because the whole dynamics of, shall we say, any battle planning or operations planning, and Ross referred to that in relation to civil aid to the military aid to the civil authorities, and both in the UK and indeed in overseas, is very important. So there's a big change happening, and those skills are very important. And so people will go where the market is, basically.
I was wondering whether David has anything to add to that one.
Yeah, look, thanks very much for the question. So first of all, when it comes to people going into the military, so I actually have a number of friends who currently serve in the British Navy. I also have friends as well who serve in the RAF. I think there's a couple of points to make on this, is that most of these individuals have said to me that they would choose to continue to serve in the British Armed Forces in the event that there ever was an independent Scotland, which I don't think there will be. They don't see an independent Scottish Army or Scottish Air Force as being an attractive prospect. In fact, I think there's been several people who worked at the RAF Lossiemouth base who've said, unfortunately, Bill, that what the SNP intend to actually buy in terms of conventional warfare, planes, etc., would not be adequate for the threats that we currently face. If you look at pretty much on a weekly basis, the Russian forces fly Tupolev aircraft from the Cold War into Scottish airspace, and we're expected to intercept that. And the plans for what we would actually put in place at Lossiemouth just simply would not be adequate to deal with that. And we'd probably be laughed at on an international stage as a result. But I think there's also another point that we have to take into account, is that there's been this view about conventional warfare, and not a lot has been said about the fact that actually one of the biggest increasing threats is cyber warfare, and the increasing fact that countries like Russia and other countries around the world make interventions on a cyber basis into our democracy, into other things that are becoming an increasing threat. So I think we seriously need to look at how we're going to fund things like GCHQ better to be able to deal with these threats.
Before we come to the people who want to get rid of nuclear weapons and want to have independent Scotland, could we just let Alex say something? I mean, you've already developed ideas more than the others, but could we just, did you have anything to add at this stage? Briefly, perhaps. Alex?
No, I saw somebody firstly commenting that the whole panel was men, and I get that, but we do have near enough 50-50 representation. We certainly do in our candidates. It just so happens that I'm here tonight. In terms of, I remember back way back when Labour was being written off as a party all those years ago, and the question was, can Labour win again? Well, is Labour finished? And I always remember somebody saying to me, there's no point of the T&G leadership, which at that time was a big union, going along to the Labour conference, using their block vote to get rid of nuclear weapons, and then it comes to the general election and their members go out and vote against Labour because their policy on defence. And so my point would be that, firstly, I believe you've got to take people with you It's the same on climate, the greatest threat that we pose just now, along with nuclear weapons. So you've got to take people with you. So you've got to make the arguments. And we've never had a proper discussion in this country around nuclear weapons. The more you discuss it with people and the more you actually present the evidence, the more people can see that our conventional forces are being run down to a level at which they will be completely ineffective. And so that would be my first point. My second point is that there has to be a greater role for the state. If we are serious about transitioning people out of dirty industries or out of defence industries, then we need the state to intervene. The market on its own is not going to make that happen. And governments have failed to do that. So you can have all these wonderful ideas, but unless you start to actually put something in place to make a difference, you, one, won't take people with you, and you need to take people with you. And secondly, you won't have the jobs to transfer to. So for me, that is the key issue here.
Thanks very much. Could I ask Bill Kidd to say how he would make up for the potential of a lot of jobs being lost by people no longer going into the armed forces in Britain, and thereby also not acquiring the skills that Maurice Corry was talking about? I mean, there is that element of the trade-off. What is the SNP proposing about this?
Well, I have said earlier, actually, that we are not proposing to have no armed forces within an independent Scotland.
No, my argument was that it might be less attractive if it was an independent Scotland. So have you got any, have you got potential solutions that would be more pragmatic than a complete coupure and a complete cut-off of Scotland and from the rest of UK in terms of defence and armed forces?
The number, yeah, okay, sorry, Beatrice, but the number of people who are in the armed forces now is less than what it was previously. It has gone down noticeably. And one of the reasons for that is because defence money is actually being spent on nuclear weapons. This huge waste of billions of pounds being thrown away on nuclear weapons, which people who are in favour of keeping the nuclear weapons always say should never be used. They're not there to be used. They're there to protect yourself. Now, I wonder about these weapons of mass destruction that are there never to be used. I think that the gravest danger to the world is nuclear weapons and climate change, but they both are a danger to the planet. Nuclear weapons are imminent in the danger that they provide. And if you're actually talking in favour of armed forces, then what you should be doing is talking in favour of armed forces which are well trained and well equipped, and which are also then providing people with a future in terms of their future skill capabilities as well. But by cutting back on them and by cutting back on resources, you're not doing them any favours whatsoever. And by keeping us under the yoke of nuclear weapons, you're just putting us all at risk.
I noticed that you've dodged my question. That's your...
Pardon, sorry. I think actually, if it come to... No, I did say actually that we've lost a lot of jobs in terms of serving in the armed forces already under the UK. And I'm not going to duck it too far, but to go back to what David said, about these Russian ships and airplanes that are coming into our space all the time. Yeah, they're coming into our space all the time under the UK. They're not frightened off by that. The fact is that if you're in Finland or Norway or Sweden, then you are actually in the similar circumstance to what an independent Scotland would be. And that is to stand up for yourself and not to be dependent on people who are only looking after some ancient idea of imperial and colonialism. It's not the way forward.
Thank you very much. Ross, I think you need a chance to say something.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, Bill makes a good point that if Trident was a job creation program, it would be by far the least effective job creation program in the UK. I mean, the cost per job is obscene. You could put that money to umpteen other uses and you would get thousands more jobs out of it.
You two are dodging my question.
No, I'm gonna answer it directly. I think the single greatest attraction of joining the Defence Forces of an independent Scotland will be that you can travel the world, helping people, taking part in peacekeeping missions, responding to natural disasters, but you will not be dragged into illegal wars for oil. You will not be part of a force that is used to project imperial power across the world. So yes, an independent Scotland may not, to its defence forces, attract a lot of the folk who currently work are currently in the British Armed Forces. It might attract a different group of people. But the idea that once we become independent, it'll be impossible to recruit for our defence forces, I mean, that's ludicrous. Every country in the world that maintains a defence force is able to a greater or lesser extent to recruit for it. I just think that one of the strongest attractions of our defence forces post-independence will be there will not be another Iraq that they are dragged into. There will not be another Afghanistan that they are dragged into. They will not fight wars on behalf of imperial powers. They will not fight wars for oil or for resources. And independent Scotland's defence forces, certainly as far as the Greens are concerned, would be committed to peace building and relief efforts across the world. And yes, that might be part of what the British Armed Forces do, but the British Armed Forces are also and have always also been primarily used to project power and force across the world. That's exactly what we're trying to get away from.
Thank you very much. Maurice, are you feeling pugnacious enough to take the questions that are going to ask about the integrated review and decisions taken on there and to defend the government on these points, or at least explain, as far as you know, what the motivations there were? So I have a question there, which is why the increase of warheads for the nuclear weapons? You're muted. You're muted. Maurice, you're muted.
Question in the chat function at the moment about the question of the £6 billion increase per annum, the biggest in 70 years. Well, because there's been a shift change, because we have, and as it was highlighted by one of our colleagues on the panel today, there's been a shift into cyber crime, cyber warfare, shall we say, and a big increase in that, in intelligence and things like that, and the creation of 77 Brigade and others that are being devoted to that, which is a lot of civilians. Again, jobs being created to bring these experts in to get this cyber warfare thing under control as far as we're concerned. And because this not just only affects the security of the country, it also affects business, it also creates our economy, and we have to protect that. And so there's absolutely important that this investment has been put into the operation. Now, as far as increasing the capability of the warheads, as you say, it is basically updating, modernizing the strategic current at sea defense we have on the Trident submarines, and we must make sure that's maintained. And you can't maintain something with old stock from 20, 30 years ago. It's got to be maintained in a proper way. And therefore, we must maintain a strength. And remember, strength is depth. And I would like to highlight to you, Beatrice, is one of the main things. We talk about peace and things, which, of course, we're all very much pro, and that we support that 100% as a party, as well as anybody else does on this panel. But where is the real peace camp? The real peace camp in Faslane is actually behind the wires. And it's those submarines and those submariners and those brave people who go out to defend, and give us security where we can sleep in our beds at night. It's not the huts and things on the other side of the 814, which is the peace camp. Now, I have nothing against the peace camp. I have nothing against people challenging the other argument. But that really is where the peace camp is. It is behind the wire on the seashore at Faslane, and those sailors and the people and Marines who defend our country so admirably. So I think that we need to get that into our heads first of all, from that point of view. But as far as the increase, as far as you're asking about, that budget is perfectly a sensible budget to increase, because we have to make a step change, because our security requirements have changed dramatically, and we have to be very careful.
Can I just say, this is not about the budget, it's about increasing the number of warheads from minimum deterrence as we agreed on in the 1990s. Bill, you've got something to come in.
Thank you very much for that. Now, the number of warheads is going to be increased. That is what we are told. It's not just about spending more money and making them smarter and faster and, kill more people per second. The fact of the matter is that the number of warheads have to be increased. Now, we've been told that the UK is working under an international agreement about keeping everyone safe by certain countries having nuclear weapons. They all signed up, and that includes the UK, signed up to the Non-Proliferation Treaty in 1968. That's well over 50 years ago now. They all signed up, and that includes the UK, not to increase the nuclear weapons stocks that they had. Now, if they increase them by 40%, they are actually breaking that international treaty, the NPT, the Non-Proliferation Treaty. They're breaking it. So where is this business about we're actually just we're being smart and sensible and safe about things? Breaking international treaties, whoever does it, is wrong.
Okay, can I, sorry, David, very briefly on this, I need to move on to other questions, which I've been dodging in turn.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So first of all, I would say I absolutely agree. I don't think there's any moral reason to increase the number of warheads that we should keep capacity-wise in this country. Obviously, my colleagues in Westminster from the Scottish Liberal Democrats have campaigned vigorously against any increase. We believe that actually it should just be a minimum. And in fact, there's probably not even a case now, because we're not in a Cold War situation, to have a continuous at-sea deterrent. We believe in a minimum standard of nuclear weapons. So I completely distance myself from this view that we have some new regulations that we need to meet. We've got to keep in line with international agreements. If we're going to be this so-called global Britain that the Conservatives wanted us to be post-Brexit, what we should be doing is we should be working with other countries in a multilateral way to reduce the number of arms and get these weapons out.
Great, thank you very much. But can I now move on to a question that I've been dodging, which is one of our hosts of the campaign against the arms trade is particularly interested in. Where do you stand on visits to educational establishments by recruiters from the arms industries? I'll start with Ross.
Yeah, so I think this is maybe the point where Bill and I slightly part ways, in that so I've, on behalf of the Greens, as our education and our defence spokesperson, been investigating the Scottish Government and councils across Scotland on this for the last 5 years. And frankly, the relationship between the government and arms dealers in Scotland is far, far too close. So this is a particular issue in Fife with Raytheon. Raytheon are Saudi Arabia's arms dealer. They manufacture the weapons systems that are used to bomb schools, hospitals, funerals. They've created a monumental humanitarian disaster, atrocity after atrocity. And not only do Raytheon get to go into schools and do lots of fun STEM-related activity with kids that just normalises an industry of death, but they are funded by the Scottish Government. Raytheon are the world's largest manufacturer of guided missiles, and they receive direct grants of public money from the Scottish Government, as well as what's called account management services. That's where the Scottish Government helps them find new markets, helps them with marketing, helps them with getting apprentices, sorting out facilities, etc., etc. And it's not just Raytheon. There's only one party in this election that in our manifesto unambiguously says we need to end the relationship between arms dealers and the Scottish Government, whether it's the funding of public money, whether it's the relationship in education. It needs to end. We cannot normalise this industry. An industry of death should not be normal. We should be transitioning workers away. We certainly shouldn't be having them in schools. You know, Raytheon's drone programme murders people, and we have Raytheon going into primary schools dressing it up as this is a fun activity and a great career for you to get into. This is completely unacceptable. I might agree with the SNP and the Scottish Government on a range of areas, including Trident. This is a major point of disagreement. That, for 5 years, I've been so incredibly angry about this. We need to end this relationship between the government and the arms dealers.
Thank you very much. Bill, would you like to say something about that? Or?
There we go. Yep. Thank you. I've listened to Ross and I've heard him speak about this before, actually, and I think he has a sensible point to make. I think it's something where we have to put forward, and I'm as somebody who is a very, very strong Scottish National Party member, but I do believe that some things we have to look again at and develop the ideas. We have to get the ideas as to why we do certain things, promote it. We have to get them out there. And I personally haven't strongly enough as yet heard the arguments. I believe there will be jobs arguments, which will be important and will have to be talked about. And maybe that we could be looking, as we were talking about earlier, about defence diversification and other types of jobs that could take the place of some of the ones that Ross has been talking about. It's something that does have to be looked at. There's no doubt about it, but we don't want to be throwing people out of jobs without first having talked about what else we could do for those people.
Thank you very much.
That as a government. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Alex?
The first point that I would make is that we should be putting masses of pressure on the UK government, because we should not be selling arms, or we should not be allowing companies to sell arms to countries like Saudi Arabia, where the evidence of what's happening in Yemen is overwhelming. That's not for the Scottish Parliament, although I have tabled and had a debate in the Scottish Parliament specifically in terms of what's happening in Yemen. Because I think, there should be an outcry. And again, it's about raising the public awareness. When you see those bits of children starving to death because the ports were bombed and they can't get the food to them, surely everybody in Scotland should be outraged with that. But we're not having those discussions. It tends to come down to very black and white. And I've talked to many workers in Raytheon because it is in Fife, and they do, some of them, really highly skilled jobs. And I know Raytheon have developed with other companies expertise that's not for making arms. So there's a new setup in Logelly that I actively supported to get up and running, and that's former workers for Raytheon. So the skills are there, and it comes back to the point we made previously, which is that the state, the government, does need to intervene and look at how we harness those skills and how we can put those skills to better use and how we can support industry to develop into other areas. That's what needs to happen, because there's been demonstration after demonstration up at Raytheon, and no matter how outraged I am about Yemen, and believe me, I am, I haven't gone to a demonstration at Raytheon because it's actually wider than that and bigger than that. The UK should not be allowing the sale of those arms in the first place to countries that are doing that. And secondly, we've got to diversify, and the role of the state comes into play. That's what we have to do if we're serious about tackling the arms sales in this country.
David, I think you're going to say what I was going to say, what would have said now at this particular point. Maybe.
Yeah, look, I absolutely agree with what Alex said about this country should not be selling weapons to countries like Saudi Arabia, who are involved in atrocities in places like Yemen. So I would absolutely agree with that point. In terms of, look, I actually once worked for it was a technology company and was harangued by people outside because they were supplying computer chips that went into some attack grids. Obviously, I was just doing a job. I did not know what the company was involved in. So we need to be careful if we're demonstrating outside places that you're not attacking people for simply trying to find employment. We've got to make sure, as Alex said, these people are highly skilled. And I think it's down to the government to have conversations with these companies about how they're selling arms. But ultimately, it's down to the government to make decisions not to allow selling of arms to countries like Saudi Arabia.
I thought you were going to say that if people across Europe cooperated, then you could have the cost price reduced to the point where you didn't have to export to Saudi Arabia, which is basically what you said earlier, actually. Maurice.
Can I just make a quick point?
Alex, please.
I talked to a guy the other day that I talk to regularly when he comes home. He lives in my village and he works out in Saudi for BEA. And I've talked to him regularly about what's going on. And the other day, my point to him was that President Biden has made clear that he's unhappy with what's happening in Yemen, because I always talk to him about that, and the fact that the shift in American president, I hoped would do something bringing that to an end. And the guy made the point to me. He says, "But we're tiny compared to America, and America's pouring in billions upon billions of arms." And so something like Yemen, I just think you've got to get the public consciousness, the public awareness of what's going on in the world. We can't just walk by on the other side or turn the other cheek and ignore what's actually happening. That has to surely be the way forward.
Maurice, you have to have a say on this as well.
Yes, thanks, Beatrice. Yeah, I mean, I think that one of the problems with the Yemen situation is the last 2 or 3 years, well, 2 years, of course, we've got COVID pandemic, and that's really overwhelmed everything. And I think had we not had COVID, I think the issue in Yemen would have been far more readily addressed, and there would have been a lot more support from the population in Britain as a whole to do something about it. And I take you to the Ethiopian thing with Bob Geldof from that time, when we managed to focus on that. And I think that's the sad thing that's happened in Yemen. And also one of the problems with Yemen is that, of course, it stems from the fact when the British pulled out of Aden in those days, which was the saddest thing, because it's the one area that's unfortunately been in the worst situation possible. Now, I don't condemn what's been happening out there at all. I mean, I was only saying to my wife the other day, it's appalling with the children. And I've lived in countries in the Balkans and Afghanistan, and I've seen the effects on families and children. It's horrendous. I've seen it face to face. And I know the feeling of what people have to live through there. And it is absolutely terrible. But you've got to try and look at the bigger picture and see that what we're doing is obviously, it is an industry, the defense arms industry. The companies have to obtain licenses before they can export to any country in the world. It is under the control of the UK government. It is a defense matter, and therefore it is reserved to Westminster to deal with. And I just hope that we have people in those positions who are making those decisions on the licenses using common sense and looking further and deeper into what has been happening there, and trying and speaking and negotiating with the Saudi government, the Crown Prince there. I mean, we won't go down there and its history of what's happened recently, he's been behind. And therefore, I hope that President Biden's strategy works, and I really do support that. But I think on the other thing too is I think we have to address the STEM situation for our younger people and development of technology and encouraging more people to come forward. And what these companies are doing are visiting schools. Yes, I understand the points that Ross and others have made, but at the end of the day, it is the engineering side, and masses of the products they produce are not combative. They're in other areas of even medical world, in the use of machinery and equipment that might even involve detection of cancer and things like that. So we must bear that in mind. And unfortunately, some of these things slip into the wrong ways, or the ways that we're not happy with. And it's our politicians that have got to sort this out and do it as quickly as possible. Thank you.
Gentlemen, we've run out of time, but may I just say a very, very warm thank you to all of you. You've been fantastically disciplined. I've never experienced anything like this before. I wish I could find this among my students. Also, you've been very much to the point, except for a few little bit of dodging of questions, but even addressing the STEM issue at the very end. Thank you very much for doing that. I thought we were going to run out of time and not be able to address it. But above all, thank you for having participated. Thank you for having given us your time. And thank you for those who've organized this particular hustings. That's been a fantastic experience for me as well. And I've been very much more educated coming out of it. So with that, I wish you a very good evening and all the best in campaigning, Zoom-wise and other.